the fact that many junior doctors are so pissed off with the way the government has been treating them, they're now looking at going to America.
Just about language.
Is that language? Oh dear, goodness me.
Thank you.
I didn't realise we were at the BBC. So, you know, going to America or to Australia is seen to them as being a solution for being peed off. Is that acceptable? Right. Okay, so look, to the real point, I mean, obviously what most people think, and it's really intriguing, you know, when I first saw on the Midlands News in the 1990s a black man saying to me, I'm a bit fed up with all these immigrants coming into here, I suddenly realised the debate had shifted, that things are moving. But really, it's fear and worry about houses. You've got a really good point about that. About jobs, about education, isn't it, about resources? Actually, I think this country is so big and the potential for growth is so enormous. If we had the right policy on employment, on workers' rights, on housing, on education, every kid getting a job or a training, you know, if we didn't have these ridiculous make-weight schemes, this ludicrous position where we're imposing penalties on disabled people because they're supposed to be able to work because they can totter to the bus stop or whatever, then perhaps we could balance this right. I mean, it needs to be that we have a policy that's non-racist, that is, accepts the quality of people's lives and skills as the important factor, not the fact that they'll work so cheap. But we also, I think, have to start thinking about this issue. I mean, I'm a great friend and visitor to Cuba. I go there and talk to them about it. They say, oh, we will make people pay back. You know, if they've got university education, if they're a doctor, they have to show, they have to put something back into the community before we'll let them say that they no longer have some kind of social obligation. But I think it's about trying to get the ability of working people to have their voice aired and listened to, which I think has been so much of a problem. You know, New Labour lost 5 million voters. How the hell they could manage that? They weren't down the back of the sofa.
Wait, can I just check, are you for an entirely open
No, I didn't say that.
No, I was just checking, sort of thinking about...
No, I'm not saying
very
that at all.
liberal. Okay.
I thought I was saying that, you know, putting a figure on it would be invidious, but I think you can put a figure on it. You can, if you take into account all these factors, and it needs to be weighed in the balance, but it needs to be that working people's lives have to improve considerably. A lot of people say the 70s were a bad time. It seemed okay to me. That's when most working people were actually benefiting. We need to get back to that, and then we can address this question.
I'm going to come over to Jeremy specifically, because Michelle did say that she wanted to hear from Jeremy as MP for Stafford, and that's only right. So, Jeremy, your response, please.
Thanks very much, and I think it's very interesting what Steve Hilton has said today. Steve has been over in the United States for most of the last 3 or 4 years and has just come back. And I don't know what was said, but clearly there was a pledge in the manifesto in 2010 to aim to get it below 100,000. The lowest it got to in the last parliament was about 180,000, I think, in 2012, and clearly that pledge has not been fulfilled, full stop. You asked for a figure. You're absolutely right to say we're building about 120, hopefully up towards 200,000 houses. Actually, Stafford is one of the highest growth rates in the country in terms of house building, twice the national average. But my view is that we have to look very carefully at what the capacity for our schools, for our hospitals, and indeed for housing is to cope. And I would say it would be difficult for a figure of net more than 200,000 a year, would be my guess, and we're well over that at the moment. The figure is about 180,000, just over 180,000 from outside the European Union, and just under 180,000 or about there from inside the European Union. The figures are sometimes complicated by students as to whether you count students or you don't count students, and what we need is a really proper evidence-based debate on this, because figures are thrown around. Let's take another example. Often we hear about people coming from the European Union and coming here and just living on benefits and sitting around on benefits. That is not the case. They are not able to do that, and they don't do that, and I think that denigrates people who do come over and work incredibly hard and do have access to certain benefits when they come here, but are working and are contributing much more to the UK's government revenues than they're taking out of them. But to answer your question directly, I think it would be certainly sensible to look at, with our current capacity, a figure closer to the 200,000 than the 350,000 we have at the moment.
And Jeremy, does it concern you about people leaving the UK in significant numbers to go and work overseas?
Yeah, I mean, you, I think, mentioned junior doctors, and clearly I'm not proud of what has happened over the past few months. I took a different stance to my government on that, and I'm glad that there is a resolution, or hopefully if they go for it, a resolution on that. I am concerned, but we have to, I'm concerned in the, I went to live and work overseas for 11 years of my life, in fact 12 years of my life, in 2 different countries, and that was a very valuable experience for me. So I would certainly not see it as completely negative that people go overseas and gain extra experience and then come back here. I like to see that two-way progress. I think for young people, particularly the opportunity to work overseas for a number of years, to live in a different culture, is very beneficial. And that's a thing I worry about if we leave the EU, that would be less possible for them to do that. But in terms of, I do worry in one way about, on the one hand, losing very highly skilled, trained professionals, for instance, doctors to Australia or Canada, and then pinching, having doctors coming from Sierra Leone. We have more Sierra Leonean doctors working in the UK than they do in Sierra Leone, and goodness knows they need them there. So that is an issue, and I've sometimes in the past suggested that we ought to be making some kind of contribution for their medical education, which we've effectively got free of charge. But yes, there are two things about that. One is the real benefit to young people or people of any age to go and experience a different culture and to work in a different culture. I think that's great. But on the other hand, we shouldn't be depending for our provision of public services on countries that need those professionals at home.
Thank you. I had a couple of signals from over here, so I'm going to take one more view from here, over to Dave and back again. So Gareth first.
I can't give you a number. I don't have the statistics at hand to be able to say absolutely what the number is. But just to reiterate the point that Jeremy made, half of the immigration to this, half the net immigration to this country is from outside the EU. So even if we were to decide on Thursday that we were going to leave the EU, there would still be around 200,000 people that would come into this country. So, from my perspective of working in UNISON, I sometimes think that immigration gets used to defend, almost excuse, the failure of domestic governments to invest in our public services. We're told that we can't get to see a doctor because there's too many people wanting to see a doctor. We can't get an A&E appointment because there's too many people trying to crowd our A&E through health tourism. We're told we can't get a council house because there are too many people from not the UK coming to a council house. Most of those times, those stories are entirely apocryphal. And the cause of the strain on our public services is a lack of investment in our public services. And I think that the more often that we try and almost rationalise the strain on our public services by the demand that's put upon them, we stop talking about the investment that we should be putting into the public services. And part of that, that's not a political point. I think domestic governments of all political parties going back over the last 20 years probably could have done more to invest in our public services. And now, the height of the austerity regime, we saw the public services taking a disproportionate hit in their funding to try and balance the budget. Just on your house building point as well, I mean, what I find quite interesting in house building is, yes, we need to build more houses. I think that is fundamentally important. Where I think the problem lies is the infrastructure that comes with those houses. I live just north of here in Newcastle. We have situations constantly where developers come forward and say, we would like to build 150, 200 houses on this site here. And as part of that, we will enter into something called a Section 106 agreement, where we will pay for, we've got money towards the roads, money towards the education budget, we'll pay for a bus stop, we'll make sure there's new doctor surgery. They build 2/3 of the houses and they go, do you know what? We probably can't make as much profit out of this development if we do all the stuff we've said we're going to do. And they go back to the council and they say, look, we can't finish this unless you let us come out of this deal. And local authorities find themselves in the invidious position of having to determine whether or not that scheme is acceptable. without those provisions in a public infrastructure. And more often than not, where those cases, where the councils actually know you must actually do this, developers can appeal that to the planning inspectorate, who then turn around and say, actually, the need for the housing is greater than the need for the public investment in infrastructure.
We're not going to go
and
too
that's a
far
problem
off.
that we have. And it's not linked to immigration, which is an EU issue. It is linked to how we as a society and how domestic governments invest in our public services and our public infrastructure.
Just very quickly, there's a quote from Boris Johnson, whom some of us love to hate, particularly I think David Cameron. As Mayor of London, he said, Brinton PLC absolutely depends on newcomers. And he's absolutely right. The National Health Service and a lot of our public services, as well as supermarkets, absolutely depend on the work of immigrants. And the fact that they're getting blamed for the tensions created within our communities by austerity imposed by various governments, I think illegitimately, because austerity is an excuse to privatise and to outsource. As somebody who works for the county council, you must know that that is a process which is happening, and the screws are getting tighter. That's a deliberate ploy, austerity, to devalue, diminish, and outsource, privatise those services. 91 out of the PFI contracts, their money has gone to a safe haven offshore. So that's what it's all about. So don't blame the immigrants for the stresses within our communities. They perform a vital service.
Thank you very much indeed. Dave, if you could wrap up on this particular question, because I've seen a couple of questions. Can I just ask more generally the number of questions that are out there at the minute? I've seen Stuart and Malcolm. Anybody else at the minute? Yeah. Okay. So it gives me a sense of timing. So Dave, please, if you could wrap up on this really important question for us.
Well, I think it's not so much a question of, or rather, not so much a question of immigration, it's a question of numbers. I think vast majority of people for whom this issue gets raised, it's the pressure that others have mentioned on various services, and there's more to increase the numbers than just immigration. I mean, one of the biggest contributors is population changes and an ageing population. So, of course, one of the other solutions to slowing down immigration is that if we don't live as long, then we wouldn't need to keep on using the houses and the services quite as long. And the austerity, the cuts, the lack of investment. I was an independent socialist councillor for the Socialist Party for 14 years in Coventry. I finished in 2012. And in my last council meeting, I happened to ask the question, how long has it been for the last person who's recently been allocated a family council house in Coventry waiting on the housing waiting list? And it was 38 years. Now, Coventry's population has grown by about 30 or 40,000 in the last decade or 15 years. Roughly half migrant workers, 2/3 from inside the EU, 1/3 from outside, and half students. And it doesn't matter whether they're from Liverpool or Latvia or Limerick, or they're studying at Warwick or Coventry University, it changes the areas. And unless housing and all the other things that are addressed, then UKIP can point at the most recent arrivals, because that's the sort of politics they're engaged in. That's been one of the worst aspects of this EU referendum campaign. Not just they as a party for what they've done, but that the media and the Electoral Commission have allowed them to get away with configuring the main debate of the EU around this issue. I regard it as one of, but not the most important issue. So I've got two suggestions. Because you say, well, I can't give you a number, but what I can say as a socialist, I want to deal with the causes, not just the effects of those things. So when it comes to things like the number of refugees, whether they're thousands who are dying in the Mediterranean unsuccessfully getting into Europe, or those who are being helped to settle in this country, I'd far rather we as a country weren't engaged in the wars in the Middle East, which is forcing hundreds of thousands and in fact millions of people to be forced migrants. And the second thing is, whether migration and immigration is a voluntary or a forced thing. I went to Coventry, not came, I'm not in Coventry. I went to Coventry 45 years ago, found work, stayed, raised a family. That was my choice. I start from the principle, I want to live in a world where everybody has the right to live and love and to choose where they live. But the people who are moving around the world at the moment are doing it because things are forced. If the EU was part of the solution and not the problem, they'd raise the minimum wage across the whole of Europe, let's say by 50% an hour rate to £10 an hour, then people wouldn't have to flee from countries 1,000 miles away to come to Germany or to Britain to get decent jobs, to be able to have a life with their families in the countries in which they were born. So I haven't got numbers, but I think if we had a different approach to it, I start from voluntary I'm with Graham on the question of any immigration controls have to be non-racist in character, but we really have to deal with causes, not effects. Because if we put a Trump wall up as high as he wants to put between Mexico, or Israel has put between Israel and Palestine, you might stop one generation for a couple of years, don't solve the underlying causes, and the next generation of young people will take exactly the same path.
Thank you very much indeed. I hope that helps, Michelle.
Yeah,
And
I'd like to just thank Jeremy for being brave enough to actually put a number on it. I don't necessarily think immigration is a bad thing, but I am concerned about the lack of infrastructure that goes around it.
thank you. That's a really good question, really good point. I'm going to go to Malcolm, then the lady at the front. And Stuart, I'm going to be mean and leave you until later because you're part of the organisation committee. So Malcolm, next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got three short questions. The first one is, what opt-outs do we have? We hear about, in terms of sovereignty and the legal side of things, that we have opt-outs. What are they? I think people would like to know. Secondly, if we decide to come out, what effect does the panel think it will have on British residents in places like France, Spain and so on? And the third one, given that the EU is far from perfect, there are lots of problems and we've heard them graphically detailed tonight. Wouldn't it be better if we were in there fighting to achieve what we want rather than running away?
Excellent, thank you, Malcolm. I'm going to put that first to Mike because I haven't put anything first to Mike yet. So.
Okay, well, what opt-outs, I rely on other people's expertise on that.
Yeah.
But what I can say is that British residents abroad in Europe, I think there are about 2 million. And they are feeling pretty desperate, and I happen to know some of them. They're worrying about their pensions, they're worrying about their health services, and also they're worrying about the issue of the relationship of the pound to the euro. And I can tell you, having been abroad recently, I saw the euro fall by 12% simply on the threat of Brexit. And it's 1.120 something at the moment, 120 at the moment. There is some suggestion it will go down to 1, or almost on an equality basis with the pound. And on that basis, our imports are going to, in fact, cost an enormous amount, much more. So that's a threat as well. So the people abroad are absolutely really scared about what's happening in this country and what will happen to their livelihoods, what will happen to their pound, what will happen to their pensions, and what will their health entitlements be. So they are really on an edge waiting for Thursday. I think the point that we've been saying on this side is that better in than out. We are so isolated, we've got 28 states forming a union of which we are part. We have 500 million inhabitants or cities of that state, of those states. Our trade is incredibly intertwined with those states. Our economy is bound up with that union. If we come out, the shock will be immense, and I think the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which is fiercely independent, has come back saying that an immediate effect could well be a 20 billion to 40 billion call on the public finances in terms of taxes or cuts to public services. Brexit talks in terms of the National Health Service benefiting from our coming out. They say they could redirect money. Again, the Institute for Fiscal Studies and other bodies say 0.6 negative impact on our economy would in fact wipe out whatever sums they wish to provide for the National Health Service. So I think everything we've said on this side has indicated that we are better off fighting inside, I think moving from my perspective to a socialist Europe supporting women's rights rather than coming out.
Okay, thank you. Can I see, are there any supplementary? Yeah, Jamie,
Just on the question of where we have opt-outs. I mean, the main opt-outs we have are on the euro, where we don't have to join the euro at all with Denmark. All the other countries that don't have the euro have indicated, for instance, Sweden, that at some point they would like to join it, but I'm not sure if they will. But we have a full opt-out on that. And on Schengen, the Schengen is the passport-free travel zone, which the UK and the Republic of Ireland are not part of. Some other countries are. In fact, Norway and Switzerland, interestingly, are part of it. So you can be a member of Schengen without being a member of the European Union. But we're out of that. So when people say that we don't, we don't control our borders, that is not true. Everybody coming to the United Kingdom has to show their passport, or some need to, in effect, their passport. So that's where we have the main opt-outs. We also have certain opt-outs on home affairs and justice. But that's at a sort of lower level. But the main two we have on the euro and the Schengen zone.
Thank you, Gareth.
Just on the British residency issue, and I'll declare an interesting. My grandmother lives in France. My grandparents decided when my grandfather retired, he was a local government worker back in Suffolk. He was a nuclear member for many years. They retired out to France, and my grandfather passed away a couple of years ago. And my grandmother, I spoke to her a couple of weeks ago. She's genuinely worried, and she's lived out in France now for about 15 years. Her life is there. That is where she lives. She has built a circle of friends there. She has set herself up there. Her home is there, and she's worried about one of two things. The first potential is that no one is telling any of our citizens living abroad any information whatsoever. Partly, I presume, because nobody knows what the answer to that question is. But the concerns that run through her head were one of two things. One, would she have to move back to the UK? In which case, where does she go? Because pretty much all of the friends that she had in this country have either passed on or scattered themselves around the country. My parents and my uncles, they live in various parts of the country that my nan doesn't particularly want to return to. So what does she do then? If she stays in France, she has a question about, well, how does she access health services? How does she access public services in France? How does she access the services she has come to rely upon as a lady who is ageing? I won't give away her age, she wouldn't thank me for that. But a lady of a certain age that now requires certain support and state things. And then the third place, if she does stay up there, the fluctuation in the pound to the euro has a huge impact on her standard of living. And I think that is a group of people that really this campaign hasn't really thought about, because no information has been given to them. They are genuinely worried about what it might mean for them should a vote on Thursday go for Brexit. Naturally, also what a vote for Remain means if there are future negotiations about access and moving around the free movement of labour. So I think that's a very good question, but I generally don't think anybody has an answer. And just on the point about staying and fighting, I think certainly I'd be confident that 5 of the 6 people sat around this table are strong trade unionists. It might be all 6, I don't know. But I've never seen a situation where trade unions are saying, do you know what, that's somebody else's problem, we're not going to get involved in trying to sort that out. I'm a member of UNISON, I'm a member of Unite, I work for UNISON, and the fundamental ethos that I have is if there is a problem that needs solving, it is incumbent upon everybody that is part of that to participate and deliver that solution. And I do worry, and I appreciate the perspective that both Dave and Graham are coming from. I was born in 1986, so I don't remember the 70s. But I do